The room feels paused, as if the air has been holding itself still for decades. Light slips through warped blinds in thin, uneven threads, catching dust that drifts like slow, uncertain memories. A faint chill lingers despite the closed windows, the kind that belongs to places no one has visited for far too long. The silence is dense, careful, almost watchful. Stepping inside again after all these years brings a quiet pulse of recognition, not familiarity, but the echo of something unfinished. This is where it began, where everything settled into shadows and stayed there. The scene remains patient, unchanged. He stops just beyond the threshold, letting the quiet settle around him like a thin coat. The sensation is familiar in a distant, clinical way, the mind adjusting to a place preserved by absence. No one has touched this room since the early winter of 1982, when the case was new, uncertain, and heavy with the kind of questions that don't yet know their own weight. Investigator Daniel Mercer draws in a slow breath. Dust carries a muted scent of old paper and cold wood, the remains of a life paused. He was younger then, moving quickly, believing in clarity. Now his movements are measured, quiet, shaped by years of understanding how easily clarity can escape. At the center of the room sits the small desk, the one that held the earliest folders, the earliest doubts. Beyond it, the wall still bears the faint outline where a photograph once hung, an image taken down after the investigation stalled, when the room was emptied of its urgency and left to wait. The victim's name enters his mind with a gentle weight. Marion Holt, age 27. A quiet, thoughtful presence in the small Michigan town of Larksfield. A community librarian with a habit of writing small notes to herself on scraps of paper, reminders, ideas, phrases she liked. She lived alone above the old storefront on Oak Street, a narrow apartment overlooking the frozen sidewalk. Her life was ordinary in the way many lives are: neat routines, small joys, quiet independence. The case file had described her as soft-spoken and observant, a phrase Daniel remembers because it was unusual to see in official writing. Someone had tried to capture her correctly, not simply list her details. He steps farther into the room. The floor whispers under his weight. Every sound feels larger in this stillness. There is no urgency now, only procedure, memory, and the pull of something unresolved. He moves slowly, letting the space speak in its quiet way. Returning after so long feels like stepping into a preserved thought. He left this room in 1983 believing time would eventually reveal answers. Instead, time only settled deeper into the wood. A faint creak answers his shift in weight, no other sound. He kneels beside the desk. The first file remains where it was left, not because the department kept it here, but because Daniel stored it himself when the case went cold. He had hoped distance would help him understand something he couldn't see then. He opens the drawer. Inside the file, yellowed edges, a paperclip darkened by age, a set of photographs in a neat stack. He lifts the first one. Marion's apartment, the night it was found. Dim, quiet. A single overturned chair. No sign of force. Nothing out of order except the subtle displacement of one object, a small, framed photograph missing from its place above the desk. A detail they noticed only after hours of careful searching. A detail without meaning at the time. Daniel holds the old picture between gloved fingers. His own handwriting marks the back. Check prints on frame. The tests later showed nothing. The absence of evidence, properly cataloged and stored. He returns the photograph to the stack and sits carefully on the low stool by the wall. The room sighs beneath the motion, a subtle shift of old wood remembering old footfalls. His gaze travels across the stale air, over the single lamp with its frayed cord, the dusty blinds, the stack of cardboard boxes along the corner, remnants of storage from when this room still served as the town's auxiliary evidence space. Now it is just a forgotten chamber holding fragments too old to disturb. He allows himself a moment of quiet reflection, not regret, something gentler, almost analytical, a consideration of paths taken, decisions made with the information they had then. The case was handled properly, every step documented, every possibility noted, yet the core remained untouched, like a sealed chamber behind a wall no one thought to check. He focuses again. Emotions are acknowledged only in outline, too much weight distorts clarity. He returns to method. He begins the reconstruction. Step by step, as the mind re-enters the pattern of the original investigation. Step 1. The last confirmed sighting. Marion leaving the library at dusk, carrying her shoulder bag, a small stack of returned books inside. A neighbor, Mrs. Latham, had waved from across the street but said Marion did not see her. A small detail, barely relevant. Step 2. The apartment. No sign of struggle. A window slightly open to let out the winter dryness. A cup of tea untouched on the counter. A notebook open to a blank page, pen resting diagonally as if set down with intention. Step 3. The missing photograph. A small frame, wood, hand-finished, containing a picture of Marion as a child at the lakeside. Her brother confirmed it. He said she kept it there since she moved in. It held personal meaning, the calm water behind her, the memory of summer. The photograph vanished. The frame remained untouched. No fingerprints, no replacement image. Too small a detail to anchor a case. Yet Daniel remembers pausing on it even then. He lifts another sheet from the file, a written statement from a colleague of Marion's at the library. The handwriting is neat, almost overly precise. Marion mentioned wanting to reorganize the archives. She said something might be misfiled. She laughed about it afterward, said it was probably nothing. He remembers dismissing the remark back then. Misfiled archival papers do not lead to disappearance, but cases often hide in the small comments that seem harmless. He sets the paper down and closes his eyes, not in weariness but in disciplined recollection. He can almost hear the soft rustle of the apartment curtains as officers moved through them that first night, the way the radiator hummed, the way the clock on her wall clicked without rhythm, as if missing its usual pace. There is no substitution for being physically present again. Memory anchors itself more firmly when it aligns with space. He stands. He walks to the far corner of the room, where a rectangular patch of dust-free wood marks where an object once rested. Something large enough to leave a trace, but small enough to overlook. He remembers now. The storage box labeled Holt Secondary Materials. He had placed it here himself when the case was suspended. He removed the file, but the box stayed. He kneels, brushing his hand over the faint outline. A layer of dust lifts slightly, catching the thin light. The box must have been moved during last year's deep storage cleanout, but no one seemed to know where it went. Or maybe someone didn't want it found. Not a bold thought, just a quiet observation. A note. A detail to be placed on the mental board without weight until deserved. He stands again and steps toward the shelves where other old case boxes sit in tired stacks. These were moved here later during renovations. The arrangement is different now. Some boxes are labeled, others bear only faded markings. He lifts a box at random, not out of impulse, but as a way to reacquaint his hands with the feel of these objects. Cardboard softened by time, paper settling inside with a gentle shift. He returns it, then begins scanning the shelves for any label beginning with H. Halfway down, near the lower edge, he sees one. H13. He crouches and slides it out carefully. Not heavy, not light. A balanced weight that suggests paper, perhaps a few small items. The lid comes off with a faint sigh of escaping dust. Inside, envelopes, catalog cards, a small cloth pouch, and a single photograph face down. He breathes steadily, slow, calm. The sensation is not excitement, merely the alignment of something long misaligned. He removes the photograph first, turns it over. The image shows a shelf inside the Larksfield Library archives, a section marked Local History, 1950–1960. Nothing unusual at first glance, except for the envelope on the second shelf, slightly out of line with the others. It looks as though someone removed it and put it back without confirming its original position. A small detail, easily overlooked. He studies the photo more closely. A date is scribbled on the back in faint pencil, Dec 14, 1981, 2 weeks before Marion's disappearance. He searches his memory. There was no mention of this photograph in the original file. Someone must have placed it in the box after the case was suspended. He lifts one of the envelopes. Inside are index cards in Marion's handwriting, notes about catalog errors, observations about archival inconsistencies. Nothing dramatic, just careful, patient work from someone who noticed small things. One card stands out. 1954 Community Record Duplicate, check sequence. He turns it over. A faint smudge appears near the corner, as if a finger pressed there while the ink was still settling. Again, nothing definitive, just another quiet note pointing towards something unaligned in the archives. He places the card beside the photograph and steps back. There is something here, but it is thin, delicate, like a thread requiring steady hands. He closes the box, though not fully. The lid rests askew, signaling an active line of thought. He sits again on the stool, letting the room's cold air settle around him. Silence hums lightly, like a distant engine beneath the floor. He retrieves the notebook from his coat pocket and opens to a clean page. He writes, "Revisit library archives, photo suggests prior search. Identify envelope." The sound of pen on paper is soft, rhythmic. A small detail, but many answers live inside small details. He glances again at the photograph of the shelf. Something subtle draws his attention, the grain of the wood behind the envelopes. A faint dark edge near the back panel, as if the shelf had been pulled outward or adjusted. But he pushes that aside for now, first sequence, then structure, then correlation. He stands, gathering the box under one arm. The room watches silently as he moves toward the door, his steps slow, precise, steady. He pauses at the threshold, letting his eyes rest once more on the scene that waited for him all these years. Nothing moves, nothing calls, yet something feels slightly shifted, not in the room, but in the quiet arrangement of facts inside him. He turns off the light, the switch clicks, the thin threads of light disappear. The dust keeps drifting in the dark. Snow begins falling by the time Daniel steps out of the old storage building, the flakes thin and deliberate, hardly visible against the gray afternoon. The cold settles along his coat sleeves as he walks toward his car, the Holt box tucked under his arm. Larksfield is quiet in winter, streets sparse, windows dim, the slow rhythm of a town that learned long ago to live inside its own silences. The drive to the library takes only 7 minutes. He remembers every turn. Small towns rarely change, not in their structure, only in the people who move through them. The Larksfield Public Library stands stiff against the wind, its brick exterior worn smooth by decades of seasons. The front steps creak under his weight as he ascends them. The building smells faintly of dry heat and binding glue as he enters, familiar, steady, patient. The librarian on duty, Anne Merritt, looks up briefly. Her greeting is a soft nod, little more than acknowledgement. She knows why he's here. Everyone in town knows. Cold cases, especially ones carried by familiar names, have long memories. He doesn't explain himself. He simply moves past the front desk and toward the stairs that lead to the small archives room on the second floor. His steps are measured. Each one carries the subtle pressure of recollection. The door to the archives is heavy, a simple wooden frame with frosted glass. When he pushes it open, the hinges release a long, slow exhale, not loud, but noticeable in the quiet. The space is colder than the main library. The temperature is controlled to protect the older documents stored inside. The air smells of dust and cloth, and the faint metallic scent of old staples. He stands still for a moment, letting the room settle around him. Shelves stretch along 3 walls, lined with carefully labeled envelopes, files, and local records. Everything arranged by decade, everything orderly. He sets the Holt box on a narrow table. The photograph of the shelf sits on top. Daniel studies it again. The envelope slightly out of place, the faint dark edge behind the wood. He approaches the nearest shelves and begins scanning the labels. 1950, 1955, 1956, 1960. Local businesses, mid-century. Community records, 1954. The last label matches the handwriting on Marion's index card. He kneels and pulls the archive shelf outward slightly. It glides with a dry whisper. Behind it, the wall bears faint marks, almost like impressions left by something pressed repeatedly against it long ago. He runs a gloved finger along the edge. Dust lifts in thin strokes. The envelope in question sits forth from the left on the second row. He removes it slowly. The paper is stiff, yellowed, not opened in years. He carries it to the table, sets it beside the box, and opens the flap. Inside, a stack of folded documents, old typeface, notations, a few faded signatures. He spreads them out carefully. Document 1. Larksfield Community Census, 1954. Nothing unusual. Standard demographic entries neatly typed. Document 2. Business Registrations, 1954. Again, nothing strange. Document 3. Property Transfer Log. He pauses. A small note appears in the margin, handwritten, duplicate. Same word Marion wrote on her card. He unfolds the page fully. 2 entries list the same property transfer, same seller, same buyer, same date, but with different witness signatures. One version bears the signature of a G. Weller. The other bears the signature of M. Care. Neither name appears elsewhere in the 1954 records. Daniel leans back slightly. His breath releases in a slow, controlled exhale that fogs the cold air. This is not yet a revelation, just structure forming, a pattern beginning its outline. He reaches for the rest of the documents, flipping through them with deliberate care. On the final sheet, he sees another handwritten mark, faint pencil, uncertain strokes. Not Marion's. Someone else. A small circle around a line, document archived upon correction. No correction attached. He moves the sheet aside, studying the absence as much as the presence. Archives rarely contain mysteries. They contain processes, layers of decisions. When something appears twice with two different signatures, the question is not what happened, but why. He sits again, collecting his observations in a mental sequence. 1. Marion noticed the duplicate. 2. She marked it. 3. She intended to recheck the sequence. 4. The shelf in the photograph from 1981 shows the envelope already displaced. 5. Someone searched this envelope before her disappearance. He pauses at the last point, not accusatory, just analytical, a possibility, nothing more. He picks up the small cloth pouch from the Holt box. He doesn't remember seeing this during the original review. The fabric is soft, faded blue, tied with a thin string. He opens it. Inside, something shifts with a delicate sound, not metallic, not sharp. Paper. No cardboard. He tilts the pouch gently until a small object slides out onto his palm. A library card, old style, thick cardstock, edges worn. The name is faded but legible, Jonas R. Latham. He frowns slightly, not in suspicion but in recognition. Latham. The same last name as the neighbor who reported seeing Marion the evening she left the library. But this card is decades older. The issue date shows 1954, the year of the duplicate records, the year someone signed twice under different names. Jonas R. Latham would be well into his 90s now, if still living. Daniel flips the card over. On the back, in small pencil marks, someone wrote a note in faint cursive. Ask JRL about the transfer. He remembers. The handwriting, slanted, light pressure, not Marion's. Another hand involved even before her disappearance. He places the card gently on the table. The air around him feels slightly heavier, not ominous, just full, layered. He returns to the photograph of the shelf. The dark edge behind the wood now seems more deliberate, not damage, not age. A shadow of a small gap. Something stored behind the shelf. Something that required the shelf to be pulled outward. He turns back to the shelving unit and kneels again. His fingers trace the lower edge and find a slight looseness. He applies gentle pressure and lifts. The shelf panel moves upward a fraction of an inch, enough to reveal a narrow slit behind it, where a thin object could be stored. He slides 2 fingers inside. Paper thin and folded. He pulls it out carefully. A single sheet, fragile but intact, typewritten. He unfolds it on the table. Confidential, LARKSFILD Property Board. Internal correction note, 1954. His eyes move down the page. 2 versions of transfer 1123 received. Correction required. Witness signature should be standardized to original. But the correction line is blank. No standardized signature. No note of which was original. Just a record of a correction that was never applied. He reads the final line. Hold until confirmation from JRL. Same initials as on the library card. He rereads the sheet, confirming sequence. This document should have been attached to one of the property logs. Instead, it was hidden behind the shelf. This is no coincidence, but also not yet a conclusion. Just a piece of a process someone wanted separated from the rest. He sits again on the stool, his hands folded loosely before him. The snow outside muffles the world into a soft, steady quiet. Inside the archives, only the faint hum of the air system breaks the silence. He writes in his notebook. Duplicate transfer plus withheld correction note plus JRL link. Possible administrative conflict in 54. Motives unclear. Relevance to 1982 unknown. He underlines unknown. A distant sound interrupts the quiet footsteps in the main library. Soft, slow, nothing unusual. Still, his senses register the shift, then return to focus. He reopens the envelope and rechecks the 2 transfer sheets. If the correction was never filed, then both signatures remained in circulation. Anyone referencing them later might notice the inconsistency, or ignore it. What mattered was that Marion did not ignore it. He imagines her here in this room, sorting files with careful, patient hands, seeing the duplicate, writing the note on her index card, planning to ask someone, perhaps Jonas, perhaps a supervisor. Not dramatic, not confrontational, just orderly. He steps toward the window and allows the pale light to outline the papers on the table. Snow thickens outside, turning the road below into a muted strip of white. The case was never thought to involve the archives. No missing items, no broken locks, no sign she had uncovered anything significant enough to provoke interference. But perhaps significance isn't measured in size, only in structure. A small inconsistency, if part of a larger pattern, can pivot a story. He returns to the table and studies the witness names again. G. Weller, M. Care. He knows the families. Neither last name remained in town past the early 1960s. Both moved west for work. But property transfers are municipal documents. Witnesses require verification. The board would have needed a standard signature. He examines the strokes of each signature. Weller's is smooth, rounded. Care's is angular, sharp, compressed at the end. They appear genuine, but the typewritten note suggests uncertainty. 2 signatures on 1 transfer form, 2 witnesses for a single event. Unless one was added later. His mind sorts through possibilities, none conclusive, all hypothetical. He does not step into assumption. He moves with method. He gathers the documents into a neat stack and returns them to the envelope. Then he picks up the library card once more, the faded name, the penciled note. He writes in his notebook, "Speak with Jonas Latham. Check health status. Determine cognitive clarity." The name brings a quiet ache of time. Jonas would be old, possibly unable to speak clearly, but the note suggests he once remembered something valuable. He glances at the clock on the wall. It ticks slow and hollow in the cold room. Before leaving, he replaces the shelf panel, sliding it into place until it sits flush again. A restoration of order, not concealment, just respect for structure. He gathers the box, tucks it under his arm, and turns out the light. The room dims instantly, the faint glow from the window casting long, soft shapes along the floor. He steps out, pulling the door closed with a muted click. As he descends the stairs, Anne Merritt looks up again. Her voice breaks the quiet in a low, hesitant murmur. "Find something." Daniel pauses, only briefly. His answer is a single, quiet line. "Just pieces." Anne nods, nothing more. Outside, the snowfall thickens. The streets blur gently beneath the white haze. Daniel walks to his car with the same calm, deliberate gait, the Holt box steady at his side. Inside the car, he sets the box on the passenger seat and sits in silence for a long moment. The engine remains off. The cold drifts around him. He replays the details in his mind: shelf displacement, hidden note, duplicate signatures, the card. Nothing overt, everything subtle, a chain of small signals. Logic forms differently with age, not faster, more patient. He starts the engine. His next destination is a quiet, narrow house near the edge of Larksfield, where the town's oldest resident lives with a caretaker and the soft blur of his remaining memories. If Jonas Latham still remembers the year 1954, even pieces of it, then the structure may begin to reveal itself. He drives slowly, the snow soft against the windshield, the wipers sweeping in quiet arcs. Each turn brings him closer to the truth's outline, not in forceful revelations, but in the gradual alignment of simple facts. As he pulls onto the long street leading to the Latham residence, he notes the dim porch light, barely visible through the swirling snow. The car idles for a moment. Daniel takes a slow breath. The air inside feels heavy with old time. He steps out. The snow crunches beneath his feet in soft, deliberate compressions. He walks toward the house door, steady and silent, ready to knock. The porch light flickers as Daniel approaches, not with urgency but with the slow rhythm of something old resisting the cold. Snow gathers in thin lines along the railing. The door, painted a muted green long ago, shows deep cracks in its finish. He knocks once, quiet, deliberate, a sound meant more for formality than announcement. After several seconds, the door opens a narrow width. A woman in her 40s peers out, her expression attentive but uncertain. "Yes." Her voice is soft, practiced from speaking to someone who needs gentleness. "I'm here to see Jonas," Daniel says, the name spoken with a measured calm. Her hesitation lasts only a moment. Then she steps aside, motioning him in. Inside, the house smells of warm blankets, boiled tea, and the faint, dry scent of time. A radiator ticks softly along the far wall. The lights are dimmed enough to spare older eyes. She leads him to the living room. Jonas Latham sits in a cushioned chair near the window, wrapped in a thick gray sweater. His hands rest loosely on the blanket across his knees. His gaze is distant, drifting toward the falling snow outside. The lines on his face map decades of memory, some sharp, some fatting, some sealed into quiet. The caretaker places a hand on his shoulder. "Jonas, someone's here to ask about the old records." The name seems to stir him slightly. His focus shifts, not fully, but enough to register another presence. Daniel steps forward with slow steadiness. He doesn't sit immediately. He allows the silence to settle, respecting the time it takes for a mind to recognize a new shape in the room. After a moment, Jonas blinks, the slight movement hinting at effort behind it. Daniel finally sits in the chair opposite him. There is no need for introductions. Names carry less meaning in rooms like this. Tone matters more. Patience. He holds the old library card in his gloved hand, turning it gently so Jonas can see without pressure. "I found something with your name on it," Daniel says, voice low, careful. "From the mid-50s. Jonas's eyes narrow faintly, trying to focus. Daniel continues. "A property transfer from 1954. 2 different witness signatures for the same record." He waits. Jonas's breath leaves him in a slow, faint sigh. His fingers twitch slightly along the blanket, not in agitation, more like a subtle reaction to a memory that still has shape. "MHM," Jonas murmurs. The sound is vague but responsive. Daniel leans forward just enough for attentiveness, not intrusion. "You were asked about it once. A note said you remembered something." Another pause. Then Jonas's gaze drifts from the window to the library card. His eyes linger on the faded corners, the worn surface. Something in him aligns, not fully, but enough. His voice, when it comes, is thin, frayed, barely more than breath. "Wrong name." Daniel remains still. "What do you mean?" His question is gentle. Jonas's lips pressed together as if moving through fogged memory. The caretaker watches from the doorway, quiet still. "Not care," Jonas whispers. Daniel absorbs the line carefully, the way one handles a fragile object. "Which one was correct?" he asks. The older man swallows with difficulty, the motion slow. "Weller, yes." A faint nod, almost imperceptible. "The other didn't come." Daniel waits. Jonas's gaze drifts again, his effort thinning. But one more breath delivers one more fragment. "Changed later." Then his eyes settle back toward the window, the memory completed to the extent he can offer. Daniel does not press further. Clarity comes not from pushing, but from arranging the fragments left behind. He sets the card gently on the table beside Jonas, a quiet gesture of acknowledgement. Then he rises. The caretaker gives a small, understanding nod as she walks him to the door. Outside, the cold re-enters sharply. Snow has thickened into steady layers, softening the shapes of the street. He stands on the porch for a moment, the pieces aligning in his mind. Weller was the original witness. Care's name was added later. A correction note was created. The correction was never filed. The note was hidden. Marion noticed. But logic demands structure, not leap. He returns to his car and sits inside, gripping the wheel not out of tension but focus. The defroster hums softly as frost melts from the windshield. He replays the timeline. 1954, duplicate property transfer created. One genuine witness, one added later. Unknown motive. Quiet administrative inconsistency. 1981, someone searches the library archives. The shelf displacement captured in the photograph. No official reason documented. 1982, Marion identifies the duplicate, makes notes, plans to reorder the sequence. She disappears soon after. Nothing yet ties these events with force, only alignment, quiet, steady alignment. He drives to the station, the snowfall turning the road into muted gray-white bands. Inside, the building hums with low, functional noise, heating vents, distant phones, quiet conversations. He walks to his desk and places the Holt box beside the old lamp. He spreads the documents out again, the correction notice, the 2 transfer sheets, the library card, Marion's index notes. He turns to the computer, a machine far removed from the typewriters of the original investigation. He enters the database and searches for the property address connected to the 1954 transfer. A single modern file appears. He opens it. The property is now a vacant lot. No structures, sold multiple times since the 50s, no red flags. But then he sees something at the bottom, a scanned attachment. He clicks. It's the original board summary from 1954. Except this version contains a note absent from the archived copy. Transfer revalidated for municipal adjustment. Witness record standardized. M.K. Initials. M. Care. Daniel sits back. Care was the second witness signature, the added one. And according to the modern log, the revision credit goes to the same initials, meaning the person who added the second witness line also filed the revalidation note decades later. He remains still, absorbing the sequence. This is no conspiracy, no dramatic cover. Just a quiet administrative rewrite that went unnoticed, except by a librarian who noticed everything. The question is not why Marion disappeared. This case was never officially tied to wrongdoing. Her absence left no sign of interference, no injuries, no confirmed last contact inside the archives. But now, with the structure clear, one possibility shapes itself with quiet logic. Marion found the correction notice. Someone else knew it existed. Someone had intended for the updated record to stand without question. Her discovery threatened to reveal decades of inconsistent filings, not criminal, but embarrassing, career-threatening, reputation-damaging. In a small town, reputations matter. Daniel flips through the personnel logs from the era: the archivist in 1954, the board assistant, the municipal clerk. 3 names. One stands out. Merle Kerr, municipal clerk, 1953–1960. He checks the town records. She remained in Larksfield long after, passed away in 1982, early that year. The timing is quiet but pointed. If someone in her family accessed her old files, found the 1954 notes, realized inconsistencies could surface, they might have checked the archives, might have seen Marion's initial corrections, might have panicked at the thought of an old clerical error rising into public view. A mistake, not a crime, but mistakes carry weight when tied to names people guard. Yet logic insists on restraint. There is no evidence of confrontation. No note. No struggle. No confirmed contact between Marion and anyone connected to the Kerr family. And yet the pattern hums quietly, the way parallel lines hum when one shifts even slightly. Daniel returns to the Holt file, flipping to the last page, the final entry from 1983, the conclusion: no foul play established. The phrasing leaves room for emptiness, not rejection of possibility, only lack of proof. He closes the file, the soft thump echoing lightly in the quiet office. His eyes drift to Marion's photograph pinned inside the folder, a gentle smile, a thoughtful gaze, a person who noticed small things and cared enough to write them down. He lifts the index card with her handwriting. 1954 community record duplicate, check sequence. No accusation. No theory. Just an observant mind following structure. He stands slowly, stretching stiffness from his back, and walks to the evidence window where night settles beyond the glass. Snow continues to fall in thin sheets, steady, unhurried. He speaks softly, to no one in particular. She saw something small, and someone else feared it wasn't small. No melodrama, only logic. He returns to the chair, writes his final note in the notebook. Conclusion. Sequence suggests administrative fear, not violence. Absence of struggle supports voluntary departure. Case remains unresolved but structurally understood. He closes the notebook. The room feels large in the quiet, the kind of quiet that belongs to endings without answers. He gathers the Holt box, pushes his chair back beneath the desk, and crosses the room to the evidence storage door. He places the box inside carefully, not as abandonment, but as respect for what remains incomplete. Before closing the door, he lingers a moment. The papers inside the box sit neatly, orderly, waiting in the dark like quiet markers of a life paused but not forgotten. He turns off the light, the click echoes mildly. Walking outside, he steps into the snowfall. The cold settles around him, soft, even. The sky is the muted gray of winter evenings long after sunset. He stands there for a moment, watching flakes drift down in slow, steady spirals. Justice, in its mechanical form, has limits. But understanding, even incomplete, carries its own weight. He exhales once, a breath that fogs and fades. A small human warmth lingers beneath the cold. The town remains quiet behind him, holding its past with the same restrained patience it always has. The case is not closed, not truly solved, but its shape is clear now. And sometimes clarity, even without finality, is the closest form of truth that a place like Larksfield can hold. He turns and walks into the steady curtain of snow, leaving soft, temporary impressions on the ground that the night will soon cover, gentle marks of a story that will continue to settle in silence.